Hey guys, it's Daryl here. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about headstocks. Let's get started. So I think it's proper internet protocol to say how much you absolutely love something before going ahead and totally trashing it. So let me just say how much I love the Les Paul before we talk about how absolutely terrible its headstock is. So if you're somebody who's purchased a Les Paul or are looking into getting one and you Google Les Paul, the words "will not stay in tune" usually pop up as one of the top searches. And if you click on that, you'll find hundreds of threads of people just absolutely frustrated why their very, very expensive guitars will not stay in tune. So today we're going to look at the design and talk about why that is, what Gibson is trying to do to correct it, and then we're going to compare that with other top manufacturers and see what they've done with their headstocks to eliminate tuning issues. So let's take a look. Okay, so what we have here is an Epiphone Les Paul. Now on a guitar like this, where there's no trem system, there's no moving parts, there's absolutely no reason why this should have tuning issues. Unfortunately, that's not the case for a lot of people. And especially if you spend a lot of money on a Gibson, it can be very, very frustrating. So let's look at 3 reasons why this headstock design is the cause of everybody's tuning problems. The first is poor nut material. Okay, so they've changed them over the years, and on the newer ones, we'll talk about that in a second, what they've done to try to minimize that. The width of the nut can be a problem too. It's simply more surface area for the string to get caught in and interact with that nut. I think Fender's system of a narrow, super narrow nut is a better one. The second issue is pertaining to the G string and the D string. You can see as they come through the nut, they go to the far side of the headstock and increase binding just by being split like that. And the third issue is the rake of the headstock angle. So as the neck comes like this, it pulls back at about 14 degrees, and that again causes binding in the nut. So let's take a look at the Gibson and see what they're doing, and then we're going to look at some other guitar manufacturers to see maybe a better design. Okay, so now let's take a look at a Gibson guitar and see what they're doing to try to minimize these tuning issues. What they've done is they've put in a 0 fret nut for less binding, okay? And they've put on the E-Tune system on a lot of their newer, the high performance series. This is a 2015, so this is on a traditional, which is a little goofy, but anyways, we won't get into that. Yeah, and so they've made it easier to tune just by pressing a button. It doesn't look good. It's not an elegant solution, but it is a sort of solution. And there is, I think, a little bit less binding on this nut, although there was a ton of pinging when I first started. The brass is soft, so I don't know if it's going to be a long-term solution, but that's 2 of the things that Gibson's been doing to try to fix the tuning issues. Now, as nice as some of the changes are with the 0 fret nut and the E-Tune system for easy tuning, this angle is the issue with Gibson guitars. It's easy to crack. I've broken one myself as somebody walked across the stage and tugged on the cable and it came out of the guitar stand. It's very vulnerable here. There's not a lot of wood right there. And this angle of 17 degrees causes a ton of binding in the nut. Let's take a look at this one up against the Epiphone. Okay, so here's the difference in headstock angles between an Epiphone and a Gibson. The Epiphone here is a 14-degree headstock angle and the Gibson is a 17. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but it makes a huge difference. You know, I would pick this Epiphone headstock design every day over the Gibson one. There's simply less binding on the nut due to that extreme angle on the Gibson. This is obviously a weak spot on all Gibson guitars, simply because the truss rod cavity comes here and there's not a lot of wood right on the back side of the neck. So minimizing the angle, I think, was a smart move on Epiphone's part. So let's look at a PRS now. I consider this the perfect evolution of the 3+3 headstock style. Like all the features on PRS guitars, they're all extremely well thought out. So let's examine why this is such a great design. First of all, you have straight pull on all your strings through your nut. So that's where a huge issues of binding come. You can see that there's wide tuning machines, narrow tuning machines, and almost touching, at least on the back anyway. And that just causes all the strings to travel through the nut in a linear fashion. So there's no binding side to side. The second issue is the headstock angle. This is 10 degrees. So if you remember, the Gibson was 17, the Epiphone was 14, this is 10. Just enough to create the needed tension on the nut. No more, no less. It's stronger. This guitar will sit flat on the floor or on the table, so it's not going to be held up by that headstock. If it falls over, it'll have the support of the body too, and not just falling on that extreme 17-degree angle and break your headstock off. Now it does have a wide nut, which I would prefer a narrower one, but other than that, this guitar holds tune amazing, and it's all due to this headstock design. All right, so the last headstock we're going to look at is the venerable Telecaster. A very simple design, really old, but just works beautifully. It's certainly function over form on this one. But you can see very narrow nut, so not a lot of binding there. Straight string pull across that nut, and no raked headstock. You don't need it, right? You have a string tree here that helps those two, but there's no binding on that. Just a very easy, simple design, and no tuning issues whatsoever. Now, I love Gibson instruments, but I would really like them to make a few changes. Their 0 fret nut in brass and titanium and the E-tune system, those are kind of band-aids that don't actually fix the cause of the problem. The problem is that 17-degree headstock angle and the 3+3 headstock design with the D and G strings that just bind on that nut. In 2016, they sort of split their lineup between traditional instruments and their high performance series. What I would love them to do is just leave the traditional series alone. So if somebody wants to buy a classic Les Paul, they can have it just the way they want it with all the vintage appointments. But for their high performance series, I would really love them to at least come back to that Epiphone 14-degree headstock, maybe even the PRS 10. You don't need a lot of tension on that nut. You know, I've got Ibanez guitars with locking nuts. That has way more tension on it than any sort of Les Paul, and it doesn't affect the sustain. It doesn't mean the Ibanez sustains way better because it's got all that tension on that locking nut. It simply doesn't affect the sound, so you don't need it. Yeah, so I'd love to see their high performance series do that, or maybe even go to a slight taper on the headstock just to make it the best Les Paul possible. So let me know in the comments below what you guys think about this. If you have a Les Paul and you've solved your tuning issues, drop a comment below as well. Or if you just have an idea for Gibson, how they can keep the aesthetic beauty of Les Paul while increasing its tuning stability, yeah, leave a comment. That would be much appreciated. I hope you guys have a fantastic week, and we'll see you guys next Monday with another video. Take care.